Hello, fellow Rebel Capitals. Hope you're well. I'm here with my good buddy, Doug Casey, and we are just in the middle of talking about Medellin. So I said, Doug, let's go ahead and go live now. We're running a little bit late. We'll get on there and we'll talk to the Rebel Capitals community, and I'll give them all the insights and the details. We're going to get into a lot more than that. We're going to talk about Argentina. Let me look at my list here, Doug. I want to talk to you about freedom, censorship. I want to talk to you about crisis investing. A lot of different topics because we haven't had the chance to talk in quite some time. But first, going into Medellin, I mean, the weather's fantastic. The people are great. The cost of living is very, very low. And I started coming here in 2014 just as an investment opportunity. Because back then, Doug, if you remember, the price of oil was under $30 a barrel. So I retired in 2012 and I didn't know anything about investing. I didn't know what the Fed was, nothing. But I knew that I wanted to manage my own money. So as I learned more and more and more, I got involved with real estate, by the way, in 2012. And so I knew that I wanted to go long oil, but I didn't know how to do it. And I knew the Colombian peso was loosely tied to oil because it's their main export. And so I thought if I could buy assets denominated in pesos, that would be a roundabout way of playing oil. And the only thing that I knew about at the time was real estate. So I started buying real estate here in Medellin. And I thought, okay, great. If I do well on the real estate, plus I do well on the currency, you get kind of a double pop. But the more time that I spent here, the more I enjoyed it from a personal standpoint. The people, the culture, the food, the freedom, the cost of living, the weather. You're a 3-hour flight from Miami. So I just ended up coming here initially for the investment, but I ended up staying for all the personal reasons.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me, George. I think I first went to Colombia in, when did I go? Probably 1979, something like that. And it was a spooky place back then.
Did you go to Bogota?
Yes, exactly. The State Department was putting out advisories and so forth. And mostly these advisories that they put out are hysterical and they're bullshit and they should be disregarded. But I did sense, yes, it was a potentially dangerous city. And I went back I've probably been to Colombia half a dozen times since then, out in the boondocks and all this type of thing. And yeah, I guess I got a few interesting Colombia stories. And I'm currently involved in a gold mining deal in Colombia. So anyway, it's a great country. Well, all those South American countries are quite different from each other, quite different. All of them are.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about Argentina. It's big news. I know you've been boots on the ground there for quite some time.
Yes.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, having been involved in Argentina, starting, when did I first go to Argentina? God, this all fades into the mists of history, but a long time ago, quite frankly. And it's nothing to be proud of because people warned me that a gringo that gets involved in Argentina or Brazil or anywhere is going to get his head handed to him. And by God, it was true. But I was slow to learn. And I liked Argentina in particular because it is the most Western looking, outward looking, international looking of all the South American countries. It's the most European of them, with the exception of Uruguay, of course, which is just across the Plate River, very similar. So I don't know. I wound up, talk about real estate. I guess I wound up buying partially on my own, partially with a number of friends. We bought, how much did we buy? I don't know, 200,000 hectares of land in Argentina. Way too much and way too early. I'll give you an example about Argentina. You want to hear a Star-Spangled War story? In 2007, after they had one of their totally disastrous meltdowns in around 2001 or something like that, when it looked like a neutron bomb had gone off over Buenos Aires. And I'm not kidding. I flew into Buenos Aires one time back then, and there were no cars on the streets, nothing. There was a runaway inflation. I went to the best hotel. I liked the Four Seasons, and I wanted to change a $100 bill to get some small change to tip cab drivers and such. And they couldn't even change a $100 bill for me because they had nothing in their box for guests. I mean, it was unbelievable. So I wound up buying an apartment in BA. We want to talk a little bit about real estate. 5,000 square foot apartment, 2-story penthouse in one of the best buildings in the Recoleta, with only six apartments in the building, 24 hours security. Fantastic building. I paid $950,000 for that apartment. In New York, it would have cost $20 million. Easy, maybe more. Right. I don't know how much more. Yeah, and so what is that apartment worth today, or at least before Milei's election? Guess that I paid $950 for.
What year?
2007.
2007. $950. I'd say $3 million.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But I could get about $1 million for it today.
$1 million?
Yeah, but in real terms, because the dollar has lost 40% or so of its value, 50% since then, I really lost half my money. So, but on the other hand, I'm glad I did it, because it's been a great base to have in BA, and you got to live somewhere, and I've lived there a lot, so there's costs for these things. People don't always.
Just out of curiosity, Doug, why do you think the price didn't go up with the rate of at least dollar depreciation relative to goods and services in the United States? Because what I've experienced in Colombia is, especially in times of higher rates of inflation, people take every single currency unit they have and put it into either dollars or real estate. So like in Venezuela, the higher the inflation gets, the higher the real estate values go, adjusted for in dollar terms, not just for the local currency. So that didn't play out in BA, huh?
Well, I'm not sure it's played out that well in Venezuela either, quite frankly, because it's so chaotic there, and the crime is so high in Caracas.
Yeah, it seems that when the inflation really starts, when it starts ramping up, that's when you see the real estate appreciate quite substantially, even in dollar terms. But to your point, once it gets to a level where you see society breaking down, then the prices just completely plummet in terms of any currency.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, buying things in Venezuela is going to be a fantastic speculation. But who knows what the prices are, because you can't even get good title there at this point, and it's just chaos. Like estancias have had all their cattle stolen from them, and it's just perfectly horrible in Venezuela now. Anyway, in Argentina, it's not like that at all. But Argentinians that have money get it out of Argentina, quite frankly. I mean, you've got the way Argentina is a lot like ancient Rome. You have an apartment in Buenos Aires, and you have your estancia out in the provinces, and the way the ancient Romans used to do it.
Yeah, here they call it a finca.
Yes, I guess that's right. All these different countries have different names for your farm or whatever. But answer the question. Yeah, finally, that apartment, and of course, New York real estate is getting a lot softer, I think. The bubble's breaking there. Yeah. But that apartment, if I could magically transplant the building and the apartment to the Upper East Side of New York, I don't know, 20, 25 million, easy.
Yeah, I see that here quite often as well. So what do you think about the election? What do you think about Milei?
This is one of the biggest things in world political history. I mean, it is absolutely amazing and incredible and fantastic. And I could tell you a story about how Millet first started identifying himself as an anarcho-capitalist. And this is why it is unique in world history. This is not just a question of a good-hearted conservative somehow being elected. Well, Macri, the previous president, was a good-hearted, well-intentioned conservative. And he did what conservatives stupidly always do. They, make a few adjustments around the edges, and they, build some new roads and clean the place up and fill the treasury. And then, of course, the parodists take over again, and we got a full treasury. Happy days are here again, dispensing freebies to the public and so forth. But finally, the wheels have cyclically fallen off the Argentine bus, and it's a serious crisis down there now, same as it was last serious crisis back in 2000 or so, where they totally destroyed the currency. So Millet identifies as an anarcho-capitalist. This has never, ever before happened anywhere, that somebody says the government itself is an evil and destructive institution that should be abolished. How can you run for office saying you want to abolish the government? I mean, this is very unusual. And Millet is an ideological ANCAP. I mean, he's very familiar with all the writings of Mises and Hayek and Rothbard, and even names his dogs after these things. He's entirely sincere that he's going to eliminate, not just cut back, not just trim agencies, but eliminate them and fire their workers. This is radical. And the average Argentine may not understand anything about free market economics and libertarian philosophy, but he understands that he's been ripped off for decades and lied to for many decades. And it's the young people and the poor people that voted for Millet. So I'm optimistic it's going to be a real change finally in Argentina.
Are his views comparable to Ron Paul?
Oh, they go beyond Ron Paul, way beyond Ron Paul. Ron never identifies as an anarchist, and Millet does, and he's radical and sincere about it. Oh, there's no question about this. My own involvement, I've got lots of friends that are very well connected with Millet. I've never met him personally because my Spanish, shameful to say, is marginal and his English is marginal.
Yeah.
So,
Same here.
Yeah. So, but years ago in San Martin de los Andes, which was where I bought the first piece of Argentine real estate back in, 20 some years ago, a really beautiful 2,500 acre piece of land, well located with 4 lakes and 2 rivers, and it's just great. So I bought that, and the guy that made it happen, Jorge Trucco, is a good guy, and he was philosophically oriented. So we used to go out and talk philosophy every night. And I said, Jorge, look, what you really need to do is you need to read a book. It's called The Market for Liberty by Morris and Linda Tannehill. And amazingly, usually you recommend a book to somebody and they say, oh, good, I'll think about it. Well, not only does he buy the damn book, but he reads it. And it changed his entire political thought process. And he goes further. He translates it into Spanish and has it published in Argentina and gives a copy to Millet. And I'd written the forward for that. I'd written the forward.
What year was that, Doug?
Jesus. When Jorge did that, I'm trying to think back. When did he give a copy to Millet? I don't know. When did he publish it? 2010, I'm guessing.
Okay.
And at that point, Millet said, I'm an anarchist. And he started calling himself an ANCAP because of the book. So when Jorge told me this, I said, well, it sounds to me, Jorge, like we're going to have lunch at the Casa Rosada soon. And Jorge said, no, I don't think so, because Milei doesn't believe in free lunches. So I thought that was kind of funny. Now, this is a big deal. So I would say that at some point very soon, now's a good time to buy an Argentine ETF, or if you want to, go to Argentina. Look, things are cheap in Colombia. They're not as cheap as Argentina. I'll tell you how cheap they are. I'm
Yeah,
not
that's what I
down
heard.
there yet. I'll be down there in a week. But right now, because I talk to people down there, you go to a very nice restaurant and have a very nice meal in a top quality restaurant with all the trimmings. You know, it'll cost you for two people, $15.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like free. I
Yeah.
mean, this happens cyclically in Argentina, but now's one of those times. So now's a good time to go down there and buy real estate and buy an ETF for Argentine stocks, because I think the same thing is going to happen as happened when Pinochet took over Chile and totally reformed it from being just a backwater that had copper mines and a nice climate. And the stock market doubled and doubled and doubled and doubled and redoubled again. Same thing's going to happen in Argentina with any luck.
Yeah, I've heard that also from Brent Johnson. You remember Brent? I know you've met him a few times. You met him at my event, I think last year.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
he's a Santiago Capital, and he came here with his wife and son. This was maybe 9 months ago, and we hung out for a few days. And about 2 months afterwards, or maybe no, about 3 or 4 months afterwards, he went to Argentina, and that's what he said. He goes, "I can't even believe it. It's cheaper than it is in Medellin, Colombia," and that's saying a lot.
Oh yeah. No, things are free in Argentina right now, so it's wonderful. So I'll be down there, and then I'm going to stay in the apartment in BA for a couple of weeks, and then go across the Plate River to Uruguay, which is a very different place, but very nice. And
So,
Uruguay is the most expensive country in Latin America by far, by
huh?
far. It's really expensive in Uruguay, much more expensive than the U.S., quite frankly. It's like New York City. I don't know how
So,
people live in Uruguay.
do you think? Do you see this as a very positive sign for the freedom and free market capitalism movement globally, or do you look at it as though, this is rather unfortunate that things need to get this bad before people start voting for freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, the entire world has been, from the point of view of personal freedom, individual liberty, that type of thing, has been going downhill for many, many years. In the US, it's been going downhill since at least the Teddy Roosevelt administration, as charming as he was in many other ways. So I'm very pessimistic about the future. Yes, technology is wonderful, and that hopefully will keep improving. No guarantees, but that'll keep improving and compounding. And the average individual, we're wired like squirrels to produce more than we consume and save the difference. Put those nuts away for the winter.
Like squirrels.
Yeah. So that's going to continue, hopefully. Although people have become so corrupted, that they don't feel like they need to save anymore. The government will take care of them. I mean, could we go into a new dark age? Yeah, I think it's entirely possible. Humanity as a group has had two dark ages in the past. Maybe we're due for a third. I don't know. I can think of why the future could be not only better than you imagine, but better than you can imagine. And I can imagine why we could go back to grubbing for roots and berries. And we could talk about why you can argue either way. So
I view the election as a net positive for sure, because it shows you that people are actually willing to vote for someone that would be considered extreme, right? By let's say the mainstream media. So that's great news. But to your point, Argentina has gotten to a point where they're in crisis mode, quite literally. So
Yeah.
that's the unfortunate bit to me, is that it seems like societies throughout history will do what's right, or will vote for what's going to be beneficial in the long term, but only after they have gone through a crisis and they just can't take anymore. I mean, the same thing if you want to look at Romania, right? I always use, what was it, Ceausescu, I think is the
Yes.
gentleman's name
Yes.
that they
That's
brought down there. And he had been this iron dictator for 20 or 30 years, and they brought him down, but it had to get to the point where they were in crisis mode, where they can't put a roof over their head, they can't put food on the table. It seems like human beings are very complacent, even when the world is crumbling around them, until there's a line in the sand that gets crossed, and then they go ahead and do what needs to be done.
Well, that's right. And look at Mao's China too. I mean, it was a primitive country up until 19 started changing earlier, but 1990 when Deng Xiaoping, changed things in China and it boomed. And it happens in many places. So that's cause for optimism that people do the right thing before civilization actually collapses. But here in the United States, we have actual Jacobins in charge in Washington, D.C. I'm of the opinion that these people's philosophical opinions, not just some stupid political things they want to do, but their actual philosophical opinions are genuinely evil and destructive. And they're trying to cement themselves in office the way these type of people do wherever they're elected in the world. So I don't know what's going to happen in the elections if we have them in 2024. This is going to be a wild and woolly year coming up. But in Argentina, even though all the press all around the world, everywhere, hate Milei and say, oh, crazy ultra right,
Yeah.
these stupid descriptors don't understand what it's all about. Still, maybe the people just voted for Milei because he promises radical change and they're just pissed off at this point.
Yeah, and it
And
seemed as though in that case, social media was the great equalizer. And there's a lot of things that are wrong about social media, that's for sure. But one of its huge benefits is you can kind of circumnavigate the mainstream media, and so they're not the gatekeeper anymore. And it seems like that's one of the reasons why Javier won.
yeah, I think so. And I'm cautiously optimistic that despite the fact that the Argentine deep state, which includes the unions and the universities and all kinds of horrible things, that he'll be able to uproot substantial portions of it and, be reelected when the elections come up in 4 years, assuming he lasts 4 years, of course, because these people can do horrible things in the meantime. But yeah, I'd say after 75 years of really incredible stupidity, where the Argentines have gone from one of the most prosperous countries in the world to descending into the third world, but with nice buildings and such.
And nice tango music.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're going to have a renaissance. That's the way I'm betting anyway. We'll see.
How I don't understand the political system down there. How easy or difficult is it going to be for him to implement these policies?
Well, it's actually not dissimilar from what we have in the U.S.
Okay.
You've got, let me see, 13 provinces. I think I'm right. The governors of the provinces are much more independent than governors of U.S. states are, but it's similar. They have a bicameral parliament, Congress, with a Senate and a House. That's similar. And Millet only has like 10% of the House and 15% of the Senate or something like that with the election. So it's not much. But on the other hand, when Bukele in El Salvador was elected, he had no representatives in their legislature. And he's made radical changes in El Salvador, which incidentally is I thought of El Salvador as the country least likely that you'd want to do anything with or be or anything in all of Latin America. But he changed it totally. I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but he put about 65,000 presumed gang members in jail in El Salvador.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people don't know that. That was huge because the major export of El Salvador, other than coffee and bananas, was gang members. MS-13 is a Salvadorian institution. So he's changed that place a lot. I think that Milei could do the same as the answer. I think it's possible. Well, look what Pinochet did in Chile. Like I said, he turned it from a backward mining province with good weather to by far the most prosperous country in all of Latin America.
Doug, from a philosophical view, from a philosophical standpoint, how do you view what the guy did in El Salvador? Because to your point, he rounded up 65,000 presumed gang members, but whereas innocent until proven guilty. And I know maybe the argument is, well, it's justifiable because on net balance, it's a positive. It's a positive for society. And I get that, but that puts you on a slippery slope that, okay, are we just going to start rounding up people that the government doesn't like? Maybe this guy's benevolent, great, but what happens when you set a precedence and you get some guy in there that isn't? And I don't know what's right or wrong. I know that you're a philosophical guy, so you've probably thought about it.
Yeah, I have, and it's troubling. It's a real problem, and I hate to say, I'd hate to advocate something like that, but what would I have done if I was in Bukele's?
Yeah, that's what I always think about. I try to put myself in that position and say, what would I have done? Because you don't want to go against your principles. You don't want to, and I'm someone that believes that it's better that 99 guilty people go free than one innocent person go to prison.
Well, okay. So what would you do? What I would have done, I guess, I'd hope, if I was Bukele, is start getting rid of all the government employees that are holding down the economy there. Just wholesale, get rid of them, and get rid of the drug laws. That would have been a major thing because
that's true. Yeah,
that's a major source of income for these gangs is drugs. They're illegal. Prices go up. It's the most profitable thing in the world. So free marketize that, take away their income, and if they commit common law crimes, make sure that the police round them up and put them in jail. So maybe I'd like to think I would have had to have put 50 or 60,000 people in jail, but for common law crimes that they're convicted of individually.
Yeah. So,
I mean, I think that's the ideal way to do it. But those gangs were like a government, were like a mafia that was actually more powerful than the government. And of course, governments are just mafias anyway. I'm an anarchist. I believe society can run well without government. I know that'll shock a lot of people that are listening. How can we do things without the government? I mean, the people are so totally programmed like chimpanzees. We've got to have an alpha chimp telling us what to do. And Americans think that way. I mean, that's why we elect the sons and daughters of politicians, some kind of magic name recognition or something like that. We need a leader. Actually, we don't need a leader. That's another conversation.
On this channel, you're not going to offend anybody, Doug. I think they see the world very similar to the way you see it.
That's gratifying because, if you're an ANCAP that has these kind of philosophical beliefs, I mean, it's bad enough if you're with the U.S. being divided into blue people and red people, and they can't talk to each other. They hate each other, frankly, and I understand that why that's true. But it's even worse. At least they can agree. Oh, but we need a government. We just need the good guys in government. And I say, no, the problem is government itself as an institution. That's the problem. And I can't talk to either one of them.
Mhm.
So, yeah, but it's nice. It's nice for you to say that, George, that I'm among friends. I don't care what people think of my views anyway, because one of the nice things about being older, which is unfortunately the case, and rich, is that I can say or do whatever I want to do within reason. I don't care.
That reminds one of the funniest things I've ever seen, Doug, is when we were both in Mexico City and we were speaking at Andrew Henderson's event. And unfortunately, you had to go to the hospital for your foot. But like the trooper you are, you still gave your presentation from your hospital bed via Zoom. And remember, Henderson put it up on the screen in front of everyone. And when he did, I was there in the green room watching your presentation.
Oh, you didn't
And
tell me.
I will never forget. I think one of the first things you started with is why you love hate speech. And you made an argument actually in favor of hate speech. And you said something, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you said something like, I love hate speech because there's a lot of people in the world right now that just need to be told that you hate them.
Well, that's right.
That was
That's right. I mean, you really have to call out people that are evil and tell them why you think they're evil. Yeah, that breaks their bubble. But there are more reasons to like hate speech, and that is, uh, if people can say whatever they want or feel, well, then you know who you're dealing with. But
right.
if they don't say it, you're not sure. So yeah, I'd say express these things. It makes for a safer and better world in many ways. Doesn't matter if people are offended.
Yeah, exactly. You want that out in the open. So
Yeah,
then you can debate it with better ideas. And then to your point, you can know who you're dealing with here and they're not operating in the shadows.
but we're on the wrong side of history in the U.S. anyway, because you have to be very careful about what you say today, or you'll be deplatformed, which has happened to any number of people for saying things that actually aren't hate speech, but just saying things which are too politically incorrect. Kanye West being a recent example of how extreme this has become.
I mean, now you could just say there's two genders, Doug. And a lot of people in the United States would put you in that category of being an extremist.
That's right. And of course, the worst places in the US for this type of thing are the colleges. And this is one of the fact that the leftists, the collectivists, the statists have totally and absolutely captured uh, the educational system in the US, not just the colleges, but the high schools, even the grade schools. And they're indoctrinating the kids with these poisonous ideas, which once you hear an idea and from a figure of authority, well, you tend to believe it. Hey, my teacher's wise, he said this. And most people, not being independent thinkers, never challenge that and grow out of it. So this is a good argument for why Western civilization is collapsing in the U.S. in particular, but Europe and all over the West. So I'm rather pessimistic, quite frankly, about the way things are going to evolve in the future, and that's assuming we don't have World War III, which is not out of the question at all with what's going on in Israel and the Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you see that evolving based on your, because I know you're a student of history and
Yeah,
these things are cyclical and we're all human beings. We're today's human beings are hardwired the exact same as the human beings 1,000 years ago. So what do you think?
I think the world's on a razor's edge. I really
Yeah,
do,
yeah,
because the economies in Europe are not doing well, and the average European is not doing well. And you've heard, of course, everybody's heard. I don't know how to verify this myself, but the average American can't get together $500 if he has a serious expense. Can't do it. Well, he's deeply in debt to start with. His college loans, which are an incredibly stupid allocation of capital. Going to college is idiotic today, unless you want to learn STEM or something like that. But no, I think everything's on the razor's edge where everybody thinks socialistically. And
Did you see what happened today in Dublin?
oh yes,
The riots.
a riot because a Mohammedan had stabbed an Irishman, right? A young Irishman.
A bunch of children.
Yeah. Well, this is a real.
I don't know if the guy was. I don't know what his nationality was. I don't know that they knew that this morning. Maybe they know that now. But I mean, people are going to the streets with pitchforks and torches in Dublin, for heaven's sakes.
I understand. Don't know this for a fact. I'm not there, obviously. That it was a Muslim immigrant, and of course, this is the interesting thing. How stupid are the Europeans that they invite in these people of a different culture, different language, different race, different religion, different values, different everything. Millions of them, millions. France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, all of them, or Italy. They're just overwhelmed by these people that just show up, and they're fed and clothed and housed, and they're not happy once they get there. I mean, it's like importing time bombs into your
powder keg. Yeah, it's a powder keg.
And of course, now we get to the current dust up between Israel and the people of Gaza. And well, what should we do about it? Well, the answer to the question is we, whoever we is, should do nothing. This is not our problem. This is between the Gaza people and the Israelis. And I wish them both well. I do. I wish them both well, but not my problem. And in fact, the U.S. can only make things worse by sticking its nose in there the way it does everywhere.
Yeah, the way it did the Ukraine, Russia.
Oh, yeah. No, it's crazy. Same thing. I mean, the U.S. is basically at fault in the war between the Ukraine and Russia. It really is. I mean, we can talk about how it really started and what's the background for it. And, I'll tell you how it's going to.
Let's go back to the world. Let's go back to the world being on razor's edge, because I think everyone would agree. And we haven't even talked about China, Thailand. I mean, you could. There's so many fuses that have been lit globally right now, and let's not even talk about the economic. The yield curve being inverted for the last 16 months, and what that usually means for the global economy and the U.S. economy. And we go into a recession, and that's only going to make things much worse. But where there's a crisis, there's equal opportunity. And you've made a lot of money throughout the years in crisis investing. So when you look at everything that's going on geopolitically, when you look at what's going on in the United States, when you look at the inversion of the yield curve, how are you looking at that, putting on your crisis investing cap?
Well, okay. Once again, to establish the context, I believe that many major civilizational values, this is very like Oswald Spengler kind of stuff, I know, but have been going downhill for a long time. I think some years ago, we entered into what I call the Greater Depression, which is a period of time when most people's standard of living drops significantly. Now, people can kind of feel it in the air, but it won't be recognized until we have a collapse of one or more markets. Bond market, well, that's already largely collapsed, but it's got a lot further to fall. And the bond market is the biggest market out there. People have already lost a lot of money in bonds. The real estate market, which is built on a pyramid of debt, as interest rates go up, and they will go up further, that's in a lot of trouble because everything is financed. Not much is owned for cash commercially, and that's happening now. I don't know if you heard that in Washington, D.C., there was a building which last traded hands at $70 million.
Oh yeah.
Just traded hands for like 25 million. That's
Yeah,
a
it's even worse than that in San Francisco.
big haircuts. So, and this is going to augur poorly for banks' balance sheets and all this type of thing. Anyway, I've gotten off to it. So what should you do now?
Well, in specific countries, you talked about Venezuela. We talked about Argentina. Maybe there's some crisis investing opportunities there. I don't know about the Middle East or in Eastern Europe. You seem to have your finger on the pulse of this stuff.
Yeah, look, in Eastern Europe, we were in the Ukraine. I went to the Ukraine. When did I go there? I don't know, like 2016 or something like that. Anyway, we were looking at getting involved in a real estate deal there. That would have been a bad idea. I didn't do it. A few years before that, I did get involved in a real estate deal in Cairo, which is now this is a whole different thing where you could talk about. This was with a friend of mine who made a fortune in New York when they buying up apartments that were rent controlled and then turned into condominiums. Well, he was going to do the same thing in Cairo, which has some very nice areas, incidentally. Well, it never happened. Anyway, I'm always looking at these kind of crazy deals all around the world. But here's the bottom line that I think people would like. I'll just give you my opinion right now. I think this is a time that Richard Russell, who was a really smart guy, used to write a newsletter called the Dow Theory Reports. He's dead now. But, and this goes back to what I was saying about the Greater Depression. And Richard said that when in a depression, everybody loses money. And we can explain why that's true. But the winner is the person that loses the least. So now is a time just to make sure that all your assets, all of them are going to go down in value. Yes, of course, some are going to go up, and you hope you get lucky with some of them. But what you want to do is rig for heavy weather. And that means I don't want to own bonds. They're the kiss of death. They're a triple threat to your capital. We can talk about why I say a triple threat. I don't want to own stocks. Yes, I can say why in the long run people will panic into them because they're at least real wealth. Yeah, I know. But right now they're way too expensive, not interested. Real estate, just talked about that. It's still in a bubble. We're still in the end of a bubble economy. So for many, many years, since the early 70s, I've been buying gold coins. I buy them, I put them away. I forget they exist. But keep buying them. And it's treated me very well because from $42 an ounce when you could first buy them legally, bullion type coins, to $2,000, well, they've done pretty well. It's a savings vehicle. So and there's going to be a panic into gold. So I'm a gold bull. Only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability. And all this paper is going to dry up and blow away. But, okay, you want a speculative, well, what do you buy? Okay, you don't want to own just 100% gold. Make sure that you get significant assets out of your home country, because your biggest risk in the world, your financial risks are huge,
right?
But your political risks are even more huge. So diversify politically. And how do you do that? Well, the best way is to buy property in a different country so that if the US turns into a police state, which is entirely possible, or has a civil war of some description, which is entirely possible, you've got a crib to go to. And I think Argentina right now is a really good choice because it's really, really cheap and things are going the right way and so forth. So diversify politically, buy a house or real estate someplace else. And so what's the other speculation? Commodities are still cheap.
Yeah, but you know what, Doug? I was doing some research last night. I saw that lithium and coal are down massively this
Mm,
last year. I mean, it's a proper crash. Lithium is down. It's not back down to the level that we saw in like March of 2020, but both of those commodities are getting pretty close. And so I'm someone that's very bullish on coal long term, pretty much all commodities. I think we're in a commodity super cycle. It just never goes up in a straight line.
yeah.
So I'm always looking for an opportunity to get in, and especially if we have a recession in 2024 or a hard landing, whatever you want to call it, most likely commodity prices, right or wrong, will come down, and that gives you a good opportunity. But with lithium, which if you're a believer in the whole electrification and Tesla and all this stuff, then you've got to be a believer long term in copper and lithium and other things like that. And then coal, I just absolutely love because I always love the thing that people hate the most. And
No,
I'm sure you probably you can relate to that.
yeah, you're spot on, George. And I'm very big in coal too, especially Australian coal stocks, where it's possible to get 15, even 20% in current dividends. And if
Yeah.
coal is
Yeah.
cheap as it is, it's going to go up. And oil, there are Canadian oil and gas. Well, Petrobrazil, I'm a big owner of that, is yielding, the yield fluctuates, but it's yielding 15 to 20%. Petrobras. And in Colombia, I don't know if you own any Ecopetrol. I'm
I
not
don't.
sure. Well, that's yielding about 20% also. And
Wow.
as stupid as
Josh, write that down really quick.
yeah, well, and as idiotic as the current president of Colombia is, I don't think for a number of reasons he's going to be able to screw up Colombia too bad. So, and I think oil is going to go way up for a lot of reasons. So look at that. And there are certain Canadian, quite a few in Alberta, Canadian oil and especially gas companies that are yielding 6, 8, 10% in dividends. Dividends are nice, but they're going to go up with those with those those
Price of the underlying commodity.
exactly. So coal, oil and gas, and gold stocks. Now this is interesting because when I talk to a lot of them, I promise you, a lot, big deal, money manager, investors, and all this kind of stuff. Most of them think that anybody that's involved in commodities A, but gold in particular B, has got to be an idiot. So, but the fact of the matter is, gold stocks have been very, very good to me, and there's a reason for that. A number of reasons for it, but one of them is that it's a teeny weeny subsector of the market, really, really small. Nobody likes them. Well, they hate coal worst. Coal is hated the worst, and of
Yeah.
course, oil is hated like second worst because you might recall back in the early '80s, 25%. You can look this up. This is not a hidden fact. 25% of the S&P was energy, oil, basically. Now it's like 3% or something like that. So
Yeah.
nobody's interested in oil. Nobody wants any oil. And gold, it's the same thing. So mining is a crappy industry. It's a 19th century choo-choo train industry. Mining is much worse as a business than oil is. But I think but the gold companies are really, really cheap. Like there's one
Yeah.
you have here's one for you. We're talking about Colombia. The largest gold mining company in Colombia is Aris Gold, ARIS, and it's traded on the NYSE. And here's something for you. Produces 200,000 ounces a year, which is good. But to be a big boy gold company, you got to produce 1 million ounces a year because the world produces about 80 million. And it's selling at, get this, 4 times earnings.
Hmm.
And I'm familiar with this company because I visited it from 30 years ago. I visited the properties that this company owns. Anyway, here's why I own a lot of it now. Not only is it very cheap, but it's basically been taken under the wing of a very old friend of mine named Frank Juster, who's a very wealthy and very smart guy. And he's done this before a number of times, along with Ian Telfer, another old buddy who's done this. These guys are like serially successful. They're like slot
Right.
machines that win, the broken slot machines. And so they basically control Eris and Colombia, and people don't like it. Why is it selling at 4 times earnings? Because it's expanding to 1 million ounce. This is production. And Frank thinks this isn't inside information. This is just speculation. He says, look, if we do what we expect to do by 2026, we're going to have earnings that are going to be more than the current price of the stock. Well, that's what he thinks. That's what he's going to try to do. So, I'll bet on it. And of course, everybody hates Colombian stocks because you've got a moron for president there at the moment. He's a communist, basically.
Have you followed the elections recently here, Doug?
Hmm?
Have you followed the elections, the local elections? The reason I say that, you might find it interesting that, to your point, they elected Petro, whatever that was, 9 months ago, something like that, just a crazy socialist. But there's been a lot of backlash against his policies. And we just had elections locally here in Medellin, and I believe throughout Colombia, for the mayors and whatnot. And pretty much every single one of them swung all the way back to the right. As just kind of backlash against Petro, because the people, they elected him, they might have voted for him, but they already hate him. And so hopefully they're getting some sanity back.
That's very interesting and very gratifying. And I don't own Ecopetrol, which is the national oil company of Colombia. But like I said, it's a very high dividend yielder, like on the order of 20%, and a lot of reasons to own it. So yeah, that's very gratifying and interesting too.
Yeah, that could be an opportunity, because I guess I would assume that it's yielding such a high dividend because the share price has come down so dramatically because of Petro. But if you've got some insider information there, like I do, where you can see kind of boots on the ground, people leaning the other direction, then there's less of a risk that Petro does anything damaging or gets elected for a second term, and that might not be priced in by the market. That could be an opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's very underrated by the market, and the big fund managers have it wrong, because everybody's supposed to hate oil and gas right now because we're going to electrify. Well, incidentally, we may electrify, but all this wind and solar stuff, I think it's nice for special applications in special places. Nothing wrong with it. But they're trying to run an industrial civilization on wind and solar. It's not going to work for all kinds of reasons we could talk about. It's going to be a disaster, quite frankly. So I'm not that optimistic about lithium. It's fine. Copper and things like that, that's a different situation, because I got to be bullish on things like copper and nickel, uranium. Of course, I own a lot of uranium plays because nuclear is the safest, the cheapest, and the cleanest form of mass power generation that exists, and it should get much better but it's so political. Anyway,
Doug, have you been to St. Bart's?
I never have. I understand it's very nice.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah, I'm surprised. I've been there 3 or 4 times now, and it is definitely a place that you would enjoy. I can I can promise you that you would absolutely love St. Bart's. I first started going there in 2020 because I got locked down in Colombia, and I would have nothing to do with the lockdowns. So, but it was very difficult to get out of the country. I tried to charter a jet. I tried to charter a boat. Absolutely nothing would work. So they actually had these humanitarian flights. So I was able to get on a humanitarian flight to Fort Lauderdale. And just prior to that, I was looking around the world and trying to find any place that just had some sanity And so I was texting a good buddy of mine, a former hedge fund manager named Hugh Hendry, and he lives in St. Bart's. And I knew it was such a very small island, a lot like Monaco in the Caribbean. And I said, "Hey,
Yes.
are things open there?" And he said, "Well, yeah," almost like he wasn't paying attention to the news. And he was like, "Why are you asking?" Like, well, there's a thing called COVID. And I asked, "Are the gyms open there?" And he kind of laughed and said, "You mean the gym?" Yes, it's open. So anyway, I got to St. Bart's as quickly as I could, and just because I wanted to continue to live my life. And I ended up staying there for about 2 or 3 months. And then, like I said, I've gone back periodically, but it's kind of a mecca for hedge fund managers, Wall Street types, investment bankers, and a lot of the guys that kind of flew under the radar in the 1980s and 1990s. Because I'm sure you can attest to this. Back then, the guys that had the best returns on Wall Street, the hedge fund types, they were very secretive. They were not the guys that you'd see on CNBC. They were the guys that you wanted to keep a super low profile. They didn't want you knowing what they were doing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. They didn't want to raise money. They had plenty of money.
that's right. And they wanted to maintain their edge. And remember, they would never do interviews. I remember reading the first Market Wizards book by Jack Schwager. And I remember him talking on several interviews how hard it was just to get the guy to do like a 10 or 15-minute interview on record. And I think Bruce Kovner comes to mind. He would be one of those. Do you remember him?
No.
Well,
I don't run in those. I don't run in those circles quite.
Yeah, but the bottom line is a lot of these guys retire or spend a lot of time in St. Bart's. So
I've always heard such fantastic things about St. Bart's, though. It's so you really like it, right?
I love it. I mean, it's got this little teeny town, if you want to call it that, called Gustavia. That's very similar to Monaco. I mean, the shops, you got your Louis Vuitton, your Gucci, your Dolce & Gabbana, but then it's all French. But what's great about these French people, they're born and raised on the island. So not only are they incredibly good at cooking, but they're also very pleasant. Unlike the French in Europe, they could be a little unruly, right? So they're very, very pleasant people. The food is fantastic. The shopping's great. They've got 22 beaches. You can drive from one side of the island to the other in about 15 minutes. I mean, it's absolutely awesome. But Hugh was nice enough to introduce me to all these financial types. And so I've become pretty good friends with a lot of these guys that were major players in the hedge fund industry in the early 2000s and the 1990s. And they did a lot with emerging markets. But one gentleman in particular, I never use his name because he kind of likes to go under the radar. But we've been in some very in-depth conversations. And I'm always and I always welcome the stories from, when he was doing this in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. Last time I was there just a couple weeks ago, we were discussing kind of the philosophy behind investing well and speculating well. And one of the things that he told me that he kind of pinpointed over the years as to, or an observation that he made, is pretty much every one of the best investments or speculations he made, he said from a psychological standpoint, was the hardest to buy. So as an example, in 2020, March, oil got under 20 at one point. It was negative $38 a barrel because everyone thought the world was coming to an end. Now, in hindsight, we know that was a fantastic buying opportunity. But at the time, if you would have told someone that you were buying an energy company or oil, they would have told you that you're absolutely out of your mind. Even someone that was bullish on commodities, it would still be very, very difficult to have the mental discipline to actually hit the bid and to buy. And it's the same thing with real estate in 2012. My family members were telling me that I was absolutely out of my mind to buy single family homes in 2012 because don't you know, George, the price of real estate is going to go down forever. And when he said that, and so he started his career in Japan. And then this was in the late 80s. So he rode that boom up and he rode the bust. Then he went to San Francisco for the .com, rode that bubble up and down. He was making money on both sides. Then he got involved with the GFC and buying houses. Then he got involved with commodities in 2020. And then he rode the crypto bubble as well. But that was an observation that he had made. Now he's to the point where he's so experienced that it's not difficult anymore because he knows he's right, or he knows that the probability is very high that he's right. But for the retail investors that are watching this, kind of the average Joe and Jane, have you had that same observation over your career? And if so, from a psychological standpoint, how do you maintain that discipline to know that now's the right time to buy? And regardless of how crazy the world seems, I'm going to go in and pull the trigger.
Yeah, well, this is one of the, I'm not a chartist. I don't believe in the predictive value of heads and shoulders and all this type of thing that the chartists have. But I do watch charts because it gives you an idea of whether something is relatively cheap or dear to where it's been in the past.
Right.
And I can't help myself when something looks like it's collapsed and fallen a lot. And that's one thing from a kind of objective point of view. The second thing is my own psychology, which, like everybody's psychology, varies with fear and greed and so forth. But yes, you've got to buck up and, well, Warren Buffett has said this, and he's so right. He says, be afraid when others are bold, and bold when others are afraid. And that is so true, because the markets are all a matter of psychology.
Yeah.
And economics, of course. I mean, you don't want to buy into a crappy company that maybe it's lost 90% because it deserves to lose that. It's going to lose another 90%. But everything else being equal, yeah, you're absolutely right, George. So
Yeah.
right now, the fact that you're in coal, and I suggest you look at uranium and oil and gas and gold mining stocks, which are very different from gold as an investment. Those are the places I am anyway. And Argentina. But I've been there for years, and finally I'll be proven right. I hate to wait. You hate to wait, be wrong for 20 years.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that you ought to admit in public, but it's a fact. So
Right. Well, it's coming around now, that's for sure. One of the thought experiments that he challenged me to is he said, George, what would be the hardest thing for you to buy right now? Because that is what most likely should be the top thing on your watch list.
mm-hmm.
So I actually thought about it, and I said, we'll call the guy Steve. I said, Steve, the hardest thing for me to pull the trigger on right now would probably be commercial real estate in the United States. And he said, there you go. That should, he said, I'm not saying buy. He said, that's definitely something that should be on your watch list. So what do you think about that? Do you think the price of these office buildings could get so low in the United States that even Doug Casey would think about pulling the trigger?
Well, you don't want to catch a falling safe.
Yeah.
The trend is downwards, is still in motion, I think, for a lot of good reasons. So it's getting interesting, but not yet. I wouldn't buy it because there haven't been massive, scary bankruptcies all over the place, and there haven't been banks failing because their loans to the real. So it's happening, but I don't want to be premature. I learned that lesson from Argentina, if you would.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that one of the catalysts that you use in speculating when you're trying to, think about it through crisis investing is you want to look for absolute panic and capitulation?
Yeah, that would be ideal to find that. Something that, it used to be, it was called the front cover illustrator, where all you really needed for investment is to go to a grocery store and look at the magazines and see what they were talking about. But you knew what the public was excited about and do the opposite. Yeah. But they don't sell magazines very much anymore. So,
but yeah, we can, one of the benefits that I have is doing the news every single day on this channel is I get to see what the narrative is. It's just you're constantly in the mix, and sometimes it's kind of mixed, like you don't really know. But at other times, the mainstream media and the financial media can be on one side of the boat, and it is completely obvious. Like back 6 months ago, they're all on the recession side of the boat when Silicon Valley Bank was going bust and Credit
Mhm.
Suisse, and now all of a sudden they're way on the other side of the boat with no landing, soft landing. So
Well, what do you,
it's so
what's
true
your
that
what's your opinion as to where we are right now? What do you think?
I just go back to the yield curve, and I kind of use that as my North Star because I think those interest rates tell you pretty much everything that you need to know. I think those are the most powerful economic indicator that we have. What is the 10-year trading at relative to Fed funds or relative to the 1-month treasury? And if you go back in time, you see that pretty much every single time you get this steep inversion, it doesn't end well. In fact, I was talking to Jeff Snyder earlier this morning, and he's a historian on this stuff. He studies it nonstop. And I said, have we ever had an uninversion of the curve as a result of a bear steepener? Meaning that we've got the curve inverted. And have we ever come out of that inversion by the long end of the curve going up? And he said, not that I can remember. So what this means is that the only time we've had an uninversion is when the front end goes down. Well, that also means that the only time we've had an uninversion is when the Fed drops rates. Well, why do they drop rates? Not because the inflation has come back down to their 2% target. They've dropped rates because the stuff hits the fan, and because we have this hard landing. So a soft landing or no landing, if you look at it historically, it's not even a thing. The only thing you could say is that a soft landing is simply the transition between growth and contraction. Like that. That's it. That's it. But so why this inversion would play out any differently, I don't know. And we had the long end going up. The 10-year went up to almost 5%. And then we have this narrative that it's supply, supply, supply of treasury, and that's absolutely true. But now look at the yield going all the way back down. The other day it was 4.36. So when you've got all this supply coming online through the deficits and Janet Yellen and whatnot, and you have the interest rate on the 10-year going from 5% all the way down to 4.3%, which, by the way, is almost 100 basis points lower than Fed funds. What is the 10-year telling you about what it's predicting the economy is going to look like in 2024? I mean, that's a red flag if I ever saw one. So
Well,
that's kind of my base case right now.
all right. It certainly is. I think it's even worse than that, actually, because they say, I don't know what they say inflation is right now. What do they say? They say it's like 5% or what? This is
No,
nonsense.
it's like mid threes right now,
Oh,
according
whatever
to
it
the
is.
headline CPI.
I I pay about as much attention to these manipulated numbers as I do to what the Argentines say their inflation is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all lies. That if they calculated inflation and all kinds of things the way they did in the early 1980s, the numbers would be very different from what they are right now.
Yeah, they'd probably
So
be similar to the 70s.
and they probably would be. So people remember what Roosevelt said, kind of idiotically. He said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Uh, so they think that, well, on the one hand, the markets are all a matter of psychology, but, you know, reality is not entirely a matter of psychology. I think it's going to be really, really grim. It's like, I hate to use that hackneyed phrase. It's become hackneyed. A perfect storm.
Yeah, right.
Everything from every angle is lining up for a total disaster, but the markets are still up there because that's one thing that the Fed can still kind of do is they can look. People forget that in Japan and Hong Kong in particular, that was the big one. The the authorities bought stocks to hold up the market when things happened. And I think they're going to do that here too. They're
Yeah.
going to,
Yeah.
in effect, nationalize the economy, and people will love it because
Yeah.
they'll hold stock prices up. I mean, this is all perverse. It's heading for a disaster. It's the type of thing you could really only talk about in a novel, in fiction, as opposed to writing a predictive nonfiction book about. It was one thing when I wrote Crisis Investing back in 1979, but writing a book like that today, it would sound like science fiction. So why not go the whole way and write fiction? And I've done that with 3 books, which I think are pretty good. Whether I write any more or not is an open question because
Yeah. I know I've kept you for over an hour, Doug, and I appreciate your time. So can you tell us about the books that you have and where people can get those books?
well, three. It's supposed to be a septet of novels that trace the history of our hero, Charles Knight, from being a young man to making a lot of money to taking over a country to, in the final book, well, it'll never get written, probably. But its first book is called Speculator, where he gets lucky in a mining stock, goes to Africa to check it out, gets involved in a revolution with boy soldiers and all that type of thing. And it's a pretty good adventure book. It has a lot of good information in it. And then, after being abroad for 7 years, because he's persona non grata, it's kind of dangerous for him to be in the US at that point, he gets involved in the drug business, both legal and illegal drugs, and makes another fortune. And this time he gets into more trouble. And they put him in jail for 2 years, which is kind of interesting. And that's where the third book, Assassin, opens, where he decides there are some people that just need killing, which I think is a fact. And so it goes into that, and that's an excellent book too. So all 3 books are available on Amazon. And the next book is Terrorist. I have a lot of opinions on terrorism as a method of warfare, but that's in the future, maybe. But your listeners don't want to fall too far behind and get those 3 novels. I promise they're in for a very entertaining read.
I've got a selfish question for you, Doug. If you were starting over today, how old were you when you wrote Crisis Investing?
Well, my first book was actually The International Man, and
Oh,
that
that's
came.
right. That's right.
Yeah,
How old were you then?
let me think. It must have been 1976, so I would have been 30 when I wrote that
30.
book. Yeah.
So if you were 30 years old today, would you allocate your time to writing a book or starting a YouTube channel podcast?
I don't think people really read books anymore, quite frankly. You can use them as the modern day equivalent of business cards. People don't have business cards anymore, really, not really,
Right.
the way they used to. And if you give people a book as opposed to a business card, they won't throw it away the way they throw business cards away, if anybody used them, which they don't. So, yeah, you should write a book because if you can, because and there's 1.5 million books published every year. It used to be in the old days there were 50,000. Now there's 1.5 million.
Wow.
Way too many of them, and most of them are crap. So Pareto's law: 80% of everything is crap.
Yeah.
Anyway, to answer the question, if you're really knowledgeable and you can write a book worth reading, write a book. It's a good idea for lots of reasons. But if you want to become well known and get the word out, what you're doing now, this is the way to do it.
Hmm.
That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your insights there for sure, Doug. All right. Well, do you have anything else that you'd like to tell the community about? Are you going to be anywhere as far as speaking engagements, or is it just the books? 'Cause I'm happy to let you promote anything.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't like going. As we were talking about before we got on the air, what's the point of going someplace to, yeah, no, not, probably not. You know, if I want to say something, I can say it on something like this if I feel like it. So
Yeah.
no. And promoting anything. I like people to buy those 3 novels because they're really good. And what else? Oh, I know. I almost
And
forgot.
use more hate speech.
Yes, of course. Wait a minute. I almost forgot, George. I mean, this just goes to show. I mean, I've become like an anti-promoter in recent years, which is stupid. But a friend of mine in New Zealand and I, Dave Henderson, we've started a something called ANCAP Radio, which is on. We're going to make it bigger. It's on what is that? It's on. What's that thing Tucker Carlson's on?
Twitter,
Twitter,
X,
yeah.
or whatever the hell you want to call it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we're doing a radio show on that, so people can find it, ANCAP Radio on Twitter or X, and we hope to make it big. Like we're giving away a monthly prize of $1,000 to the person who does the most to promote proper values in the world. That's another story. People can go there and find out about it. Monthly prize. Other thing, I have a podcast that I do with Matt Smith weekly, bi-weekly, called Doug Casey's Take on YouTube and other places. Because
Josh is actually putting that in the chat.
Oh, good, because we were kicked off of YouTube for a while. We had 3 strikes and we got one removed. So we're back on YouTube. And the third thing we do, oh, I know, it's internationalman.com. Yeah. And it's really a good free blog where we have really great articles every week, including one by me, where I say things that shock and disgust a lot of people. So those are the 3 things in addition to the books.
All right, Doug. Well, thank you very much for your time. I value your insights tremendously. And when I first retired in 2012, you were one of the people that I really, really looked up to, and indirectly just by watching your interviews and whatnot. And you've had a massive influence on the way I think and on my life, quite frankly. So again, thank you for that.
Well, I really appreciate that, George. That means a lot to me coming from you. And we'll have to do this again because it was a fun chat. I enjoyed talking to you.
Absolutely. We'll do it again soon.
Okay. Have a good day, huh?